the Bible says that they are the synagogue of Satan. I know your tribulation and your poverty and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews, Hebrew Israelites, but are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. We know they're not true because of how they reject Christ and his teachings.
What's up? Welcome back to the channel, and much love and respect to everyone watching the video. So today we're talking about the Smart Christians channel, and I recently did a video on him. I just want to recap some of the things that I learned. Basically, he's a man who teaches that if you try to keep God's commandments and keep his laws, that you're going to hell. He also said that this generation of so-called black people are the worst people in the history of the earth. And he also pretty much defended some of the things that the slave masters did to so-called black people during slavery, which made me think a little more about slavery, and made me think of the fact that, of course, there's nothing new under the sun, and it's unfortunate, but there were some so-called black people during those days that had a similar mindset that Mr. Corey Minor seems to have. And we're going to go a little deeper into that in a little while, but this is also a man who called all Hebrew Israelites ignorant. And as we heard in that first clip, he basically said, if you're a so-called black person and you believe you're a Hebrew Israelite, then you're of the synagogue of Satan. And in my personal opinion, this is the type of teacher or pastor that Pastor Stephen Darby was referring to when he preached this message back in the year of 2015.
The majority of our opposition are now preachers who have been trained in seminary by white scholars to learn the Bible a certain way. And the reason why we had to go to seminary was to educate us with white thinking about the Bible. The problem is that the Bible was not written by white people or for white people. The white boy just told y'all Paul and them was black. He was telling you everybody was black. The Bible is a book about a black people. You got what I'm now? I know that, and you do your own research. It's not a racist thing. It's a truth thing. Now, when we accepted this Christ to be white, nobody has had a problem with that. Even though all the evidence, even in the Bible itself, scriptures was telling us, but we still accepted it because we love God, right? But now that we're starting, this is the end time revelation. The Bible, an angel told Daniel, shut up the book to the end. Close it up to the end. Knowledge is going to be revealed in the end. Well, this is the knowledge that God is revealing, because it's very important to know who's who. Are you understanding what I'm saying? And so now that we are trying to find out some things, we have all kinds of opposition in people, even our own people, because it's so difficult for slaves to know they was special. It was something about them.
Alright, so I want to make it clear again, that's my personal opinion. As most of you already know, Pastor Stephen Darby unfortunately passed away in 2017. And my thoughts and beliefs have nothing to do with him or his family. And I'm not sure if Mr. Corey Minor even considers himself a pastor, but the fact is he's teaching thousands of people certain things that I do not believe are biblically or historically accurate. And, I do believe what Pastor Stephen Darby said was true, that it's going to be a lot of so-called black people, our own people, whether they're pastors or teachers, that are our biggest opposition when it comes to telling our people who we are according to the Bible. And in my opinion, someone who is willing to defend the slave masters from what they did to our people has a very dangerous mindset, and they simply can't be trusted.
You know what these slavers wouldn't do? They wouldn't kill their own. Some of these slavers felt like, let's hold on. Some of these slavers felt like that they were transporting cattle. Now, right or wrong.
And what about when they raped our women, and then you had
Listen, I understand they were taken to these stations. They had babies cut out of their stomachs, raped. They were in order to dehumanize them. I get that. I get that. And then you drive over to 42nd and Post in Indianapolis. You drive a second over to Fair Park here, or you go someplace in New York, or you go someplace in Miami, what have you, and you're gonna see black folks doing the very same thing that slavers did to their own people, and making money off of it the same way. My point is, and here's the problem: they have absolutely, not that they had excuses either, but even more so today. Even more so, they're not doing it for, and by the way, they're not even doing it for an economic reason. They're doing it again just cause.
Alright, so I think it's a very good thing that the two men that were up there challenged him on what he was saying, and basically showed his hypocrisy because, like the brother stated, some of the slave masters did kill their own people, so you can't use that as a reason that this so-called generation of black people are worse than the slave masters. And like I stated in the previous video that I did, I work directly with the youth and young adults, and I try my best to stay up to different current events that take place with this generation. So I know we have a lot of issues and a lot of things that we're dealing with, and of course we have to always hold ourselves accountable. But to say that this generation is the worst generation to ever walk the face of the earth, and to say that, you know, that they're worse than the generation of people that had us in slavery, is just complete disrespect. And it shows a very unhealthy mindset that some of our people have had, you know, going back to the days of slavery, unfortunately. So I'm going to play a clip from Malcolm X, which some of you guys may be familiar with.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They sent some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. And when the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. So the house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food. But he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro say, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you could tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, that house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today, because we still got some house niggas running around here.
Alright, so we know those words were spoken many years ago, but it's very unfortunate that it's still true in certain cases today. And I'm not saying if you're a so-called black person that you don't believe that we're, you know, the Israelites of the Bible, that you're a sellout or anything like that. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I don't believe that's true. And, you know, the Lord wakes people up at different times, so I would not ever say anything like that. But of course, like I stated earlier in this video, I believe that the Most High and his Son are waking a lot of our people up, and the enemy is always going to use our own people to try to put us back to sleep the same way he used them in the days of slavery. It's the same thing going on today, whether it's these so-called Christian pastors and teachers, or those who are involved in Freemasonry and Greek fraternities, or, you know, so-called black people who kill and sell drugs to their own people. I mean, I'm gonna stop it there because I can literally go on and on about that. But I want to play this clip really quick because, in my opinion, it's a good example of how some of our people look down on each other and how it causes further division between us.
So let me ask you a question, and be honest with me. And Minister Jones, you can chime in too. Let me ask you a question, all y'all question. People who think like me, and people who think like, and I'm not trying to cause, Hunter, I love you to death. I ain't trying to cause no fight. People think like me and people think like you. Who tends to be the more successful in our community?
Shots fired. I don't get that. What do you mean?
People who hold on to cultural identity and things like that in our community, from what I've seen, and I used to be there, are nowhere near as successful as folks who say, you know what, that cultural stuff can be second, third, or tertiary, but having a God-centered cultural identity,
Right.
and then taking care of your family, being a man. I'm not saying you against that, but my point is forgetting about being black, but being a man first and foremost, being a husband, father, and taking care of business. Those are the guys. Now, those are the ones that might get labeled as a sellout or what, this or that or what have you. But they tend to do better. Their kids go to school. Their kids don't go to prison.
Alright, so I did find certain things in that clip a little bit disrespectful, but hopefully Mr. Corey didn't mean it that way, and it seems like the brother didn't take it that way. And, from what I see, looks like the other brother's doing well and that they have some type of rapport, so that's always a good thing, but the way it came off was a bit disrespectful to me. And I also don't think it's accurate because we know in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, it says that the Messiah was sent unto the lost sheep of Israel. So that clearly means that he identified with his people. Now, of course, I believe that Gentiles can be grafted in, but the point remains that he did identify with his people. And most of us know the story of Moses, and he also identified with his people. So I'm going to read these verses really quick. And this is the book of Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 25. And it goes, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. And of course, for those of us who are familiar with the story, we know that when it says the people of God, it's talking about a very specific group of people. It's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's very clear that Moses identified with his people. He chose rather to suffer affliction with his people than to enjoy, being rich and popular and enjoying the things of the world and enjoying sin like the word says. So the point remains, all throughout the Bible we see righteous men and women identifying with their people. And of course we know it's very important that every man takes care of his family, but you can do that and still identify with your people. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe he said something about, putting God first, which of course I agree. We should always put the Most High and his son first. But when you're listening to somebody like him, what does that really mean? Because again, this is someone who consistently teaches that we should not keep God's commandments or keep his laws.
Anybody have a responsible child? By the way, anybody have a responsible child and an irresponsible child? I'm not saying I do what I'm saying. Do you? There's just something about that child. They get up and they just do it. Why? Because it's in them. It's in them to do the right thing. If you are a born again believer, if you've got the Spirit of the Lord living in you, it's in you to do the right thing. That's why you don't need the law. Knucklehead. That's why you don't.
Alright, so basically what he's saying is that if you have the Holy Spirit, you don't have to keep God's commandments or keep his laws anymore. And if that's true, he should be able to give you multiple scriptures supporting what he's saying. But what he's saying is not the truth. I'm going to read Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. And it goes, and the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Alright, so as we just read, the enemy is at war with those who keep the commandments of the Most High and the Messiah. Because that's what we're instructed to do, and it's all throughout the Bible. And it also says this, only going to be a remnant. And we have to keep that in mind that, a lot of people are not going to understand this truth, and they're not going to want to walk in the ways of the Most High in Christ, and they're not going to want to keep his commandments and keep his laws. But there's always going to be a remnant who does the best they can to try to keep God's commandments and keep his laws. So, we just have to think logically. If we were not supposed to be keeping God's commandments, why would the enemy be at war with those who are trying to keep God's commandments? There's obviously power in keeping God's commandments and keeping his laws. And of course, there's unfortunately going to be people out there who try to tell you otherwise and tell you that the laws are done away with and that we don't have to keep God's commandments. But those people are deceiving you, whether they, are doing it ignorantly or intentionally. They are deceiving people. And as far as Mr. Corey Minor and the Smart Christians channel, I truly hope he repents and that he stops teaching certain things, because it's very dangerous. But I'm gonna pretty much wrap it up. I really appreciate everyone who watched the video, and at the end of the day, the Most High is always in control, and he will always have the final word. I'm out. Peace.